In 1970, Brazil didn't just win the World Cup, they danced through it. United by the same streets, the same rhythm, the same sun-drenched dreams as the fans cheering them on. It was football as art, a cultural heartbeat that the world called Joga Bonito. Fast forward to 2026 and the landscape has changed. Something essential feels lost. Joga Bonito was never just a strategy. It was an inheritance. It was a style born from the unique cadence of Brazilian life, transversing through tight spaces with a flair that felt more like an instinct. It was a language spoken only in the local neighborhoods, understood by those accustomed to the Brazilian way of life. Today, as the team struggles to balance that historical magic with the demands of the modern game, there is a growing disconnect. The story of Brazil's decline is that of a nation struggling to keep its identity amidst the pressures of the modern game. A heartbreaking failure to transition their style to a game which evolved in part to counter them and their utter dominance over football in the mid-20th century. This is a story of the decline of a footballing dynasty that has persevered through two home World Cup tragedies, military dictatorships, economic and social instability, and an eroding cultural connection between the men on the field and the people they represent in search of the eternal soul of the Selecao. This is how a team who learned to not just rise but soar high into the sky after a punch gradually lost their ability to fight. July 16, 1950, Brazil hosted the final match of the FIFA World Cup against Uruguay. While nearly 2,000 spectators packed in the concrete bowl of the newly built Maracanazo in Rio de Janeiro, the true weight of the tragedy was felt in the modest living rooms of working-class families across the country. In the interior town of Bauru, São Paulo, a journeyman footballer named João Ramos do Nascimento, known to the footballing world as Ronaldinho, sat glued to a wireless radio. For Ronaldinho, a centre-forward whose own professional career had been cruelly derailed by a severe knee injury, the 1950 World Cup tournament was a source of immense pride. Because the tournament utilized a final round-robin group stage, the hosts needed only a draw against Uruguay to claim their first world title. Food, drinks, music, festivities, the party was set. All that was left was the gruesome task of making their opponent's net bulge more frequently than theirs. As the radio crackled in Ronaldinho's home, they wait. At the sound of the final whistle, Brazil cried, not of joy, but of utmost sorrow. Uruguay had just beaten them 2-1. With the setting in of this cruel reality, Ronaldinho collapsed into his chair and wept open-heartedly. Watching the scene unfold was Ronaldinho's 9-year-old son Edson, known to his family as Zico. The boy had never seen his father cry. Confused by the sudden suffocating grief of adult men in the room, young Zico walked over to his father and made a famous, desperate attempt to comfort him. "Don't cry, Papa. I will win a World Cup for you. I promise." 8 years later, Zico would fulfill that promise in a tournament where the world first learned his name, Pelé. The systemic fallout of the match permanently altered the infrastructure of Brazilian football. Goalkeeper Moacir Barbosa was cruelly blamed for the defeat. He was ostracized by society for the rest of his life. Brazil permanently discarded their traditional white uniforms with blue colors, viewing them as a cursed symbol of psychological weakness. In 1953, a national contest was held to design a new kit utilizing all 4 colors of the national flag, resulting in the iconic yellow shirt, green trim, and blue shorts, the Canarino worn today. The Maracanazo established the baseline structural pattern of the Brazil national team. an unmatched capacity for beautiful football, perpetually threatened by an underlying emotional volatility when facing immense pressure. It was the dark foundation upon which the triumphs of 1958, 1962, and 1970 were built, and it is this struggle that they will continue to battle in the coming decades, all the way till today. The FIFA World Cup in Sweden was a structural and psychological resurrection of the Selecao. First, they had to overcome something Brazilian football had long been shackled by, the complexo de vira-lata, the mongrel complex, a profound collective anxiety that left the Selecao emotionally paralyzed when facing elite European opposition. When the squad traveled to Scandinavia, the Brazil Football Federation (CBF) took unprecedented measures to combat this vulnerability, employing a team psychologist, Dr. João Carvalhais, to conduct psychometric tests on the players. Among the squad was a 17-year-old forward from Santos named Edson Arantes do Nascimento, Pelé. Dr. Carvalhais' clinical evaluation of the teenager was starkly negative. His report famously concluded that Pelé was quote-unquote obviously infantile and lacked the emotional maturity required to withstand the pressures of a World Cup match. He recommended against his selection. However, Vicente Feola, their ever-pragmatic manager, urged by his senior players, ignored the psychological data. He recognized that Pelé possessed something immensely valuable, an unburdened street-forged autonomy completely untouched by the ghosts of 1950. As part of our preparations, the team psychologist Professor João Carvalhais had conducted tests on all the players, writes Pelé in his autobiography, Pelé. We had to draw sketches of people and answer questions to help João make assessments about whether we should be picked or not. About me, he concluded I should not be selected. Pelé is obviously infantile, he lacks the necessary fighting spirit. He also advised against Garrincha, who was not seen as responsible enough. Fortunately for me and for Garrincha, Vicente Viola was always guided by his instinct, and he just nodded gravely at the psychologist saying, quote, "You might be right. The thing is you don't know anything about football. If Pelé's knee is ready, he plays." End quote. Pelé did not start the tournament due to a knee injury, missing the opening matches against Austria and England. His introduction to the global stage occurred in the final group stage match against a formidable Soviet Union side, renowned for their scientific, rigid approach to fitness and tactics. Alongside Garrincha, Pelé transformed Brazil's attack from a rigid system into a fluid, unpredictable symphony. While Garrincha dismantled the Soviet left flank with hypnotic dribbles, Pelé operated as an advanced interior, combining hyper-athletic verticality with an innate understanding of space. Brazil won 2-0, but it was in the knockout rounds where the teenager single-handedly re-engineered the trajectory of Brazilian sports and football history. The pinnacle of this awakening occurred in the final on June 29, 1958 at the Rasunda Stadium in Solna, facing the host nation, Sweden. Brazil conceded an early goal. The team responded with collective composure, empowered by the infectious audacity of their youngest player. In the 55th minute, Pelé executed a piece of skill, trapping a high cross on his chest inside the penalty area. He calmly lobbed the ball over the head of an onrushing Swedish defender before tracking his descent and volleying it into the bottom corner of the net. This goal, an act of cultural liberation and footballing revolution, reintroduced Joga Bonito not as an inefficient style one would just possess to be unleashed when necessary, but as the ultimate weapon of tactical superiority. Pelé added a second goal in the final minutes with a looping header, sealing a dominant 5-2 victory and crowning Brazil as world champions for the very first time. When the final whistle blew, Pelé collapsed onto the pitch, weeping uncontrollably on the shoulder of goalkeeper Gilmar. These tears carried a completely opposite character to those shed by his father by the radio in 1950. The tears of sorrow of 1950 turned joy in 1958. While the phrase became a global marketing slogan in later decades, in 1958, Joga Bonito was a revolutionary tactical doctrine. It was the organic fusion of Brazil's urban working-class street culture with sports and competition. For years, European theorists dismissed Brazilian football as structurally undisciplined, viewing its heavy reliance on individual brilliance and improvisation as an inefficient luxury that would inevitably fold against rigorous collective defensive systems. The emergence of the 17-year-old Pelé completely shattered this notion. Working inside manager Vicente Faiola's groundbreaking 4-2-4 formation, Pelé operationalized Joga Bonito. He proved that creative expression was not the enemy of tactical discipline, but its ultimate evolution. The true brilliance of Joga Bonito lay in its unpredictability. In the 1950s, European defenses relied on strict man-marking systems. These systems depended on opposition players occupying predictable, static zones. A more accurate notion to construct is that they saw football like a game of chess. Pelé, alongside the unorthodox winger Garrincha and the cerebral midfielder Didi, completely disrupted this spatial logic. Driven by the Genga, the fluid rhythm-based body movements rooted in Afro-Brazilian capoeira and samba, Pelé played in a beautiful, fluid yet unpredictable, destructive way that the football world was simply not yet ready for. He made moves that they had no structural counter for. By inserting the street-born joy into a highly sophisticated framework, the 1958 World Cup fundamentally changed how the world defined footballing excellence. Joga Bonito became recognized as the most dominant, feared, and universally admired tactical philosophy on earth. It was what transformed the Selecao into a global footballing empire. By the 1962 World Cup in Chile, Brazil was no longer an underdog. They were the haunted, defending champions. Catastrophe would strike early in the tournament. Pelé suffered a severe hamstring tear against Czechoslovakia. Because substitutions were not yet allowed in this era, he was forced to spend the remainder of the match limping out wide. While the game ultimately finished as a 0-0 draw, Brazil's hopes of retaining the World Cup were suddenly pushed to the brink of disaster as their star man was set to be sidelined for the remainder of the tournament. In an ultimate test of depth, another man stepped up, Garrincha. Having survived a childhood bout with polio, Garrincha's right leg was shorter than his left, and both his knees were severely deformed. Doctors had originally doubted he would ever walk normally, let alone play professional sports. Yet, defying all physical limitations, he transformed into the joy of the people. When Brazil faced Spain in their final group match, Rivaldo stepped into Pelé's spot in the lineup, but it was Garrincha who truly orchestrated the performance. After a quiet opening half, he erupted in the second, leaving two Spanish defenders completely turned around. He whipped in a flawless cross for Rivaldo to convert, securing Brazil's spot in the quarterfinals. Garrincha's masterclass was only just getting started. Brazil's quarterfinal opponents, England, boasted a disciplined and well-organized defense. Confident, they neutralized Garrincha through tight marking. However, Garrincha played like a man possessed that day. Abandoning his usual station, he drifted across the entire front line, completely dictating the game and making the English defenders look like helpless puppets. His performance that afternoon earned a permanent place in football folklore. He opened the scoring with a powerful header from a corner, a rarity from him. Later, English goalkeeper Ron Springett could only parry Garrincha's venomous free kick, allowing Vava to fire home the rebound. The crowning moment was a spectacular curling long-range strike from outside the penalty area. With a 3-1 victory, Garrincha had single-handedly dismantled England. In the semi-finals, Brazil clashed with the host nation, Chile. Despite a deafening, hostile crowd roaring for the home side, Garrincha remained entirely unfazed by the atmosphere or his opponent. He bagged another brace, one via a fierce left-footed shot and the other with a header, and also provided an assist for Vava. Yet, the match ended in controversy. After enduring relentless cynical fouls from Chilean defender Rojas, Garrincha finally snapped and struck back with his knee. The referee immediately sent him off. To make matters worse, as he walked off the pitch, a stone thrown from the crowd struck him, leaving the Brazilian magician bleeding from his head as he departed. Under normal circumstances, the red card meant missing the final. However, Brazilian officials launched a frantic appeal to FIFA, whose disciplinary committee decided punishments by a panel vote. In a stroke of luck, the referee admitted he hadn't actually witnessed the incident himself, but had relied entirely on his linesman's word. Garrincha was cleared to play. The final set up a rematch with Czechoslovakia, but a new crisis emerged. Garrincha woke up with a severe fever. Medics pumped him with heavy doses of aspirin and he took the field, visibly burning up. While he didn't score, his terrifying reputation alone forced the Czech defense to focus entirely on containing a delirious Garrincha. This concentration on him alone opened massive gaps for his teammates. Zico, Vava, Rivaldo capitalized brilliantly, securing a memorable 3-1 victory. In Pelé's absence, Garrincha had carried the nation on his back to secure Brazil's second consecutive world title. Garrincha finished the tournament with 4 crucial goals, all scored in knockout phases. He not only shared the Golden Boot as joint top scorer, but also captured the Golden Ball as the tournament's finest player. Garrincha proved something: the country's genius didn't belong to just one superstar, it belonged to the collective. The 1970 World Cup in Mexico represents the absolute peak of Brazilian football in mythology, the apex of the Brazilian style. This was Brazil at their very best. However, as the national team shone brightly in Mexico, it was all darkness back at home. Brazil was under the military dictatorship led by General Emiliano Garrastazu Medici. Understanding the immense social power of football, the military government decided to wield football as a crucial instrument of propaganda. He sanctioned the construction of a lot of new stadiums throughout the nation and frequently interfered with the sport, hijacking team selections at Flamengo. Soon, the national team was next. Tostao manager João Saldanha led Brazil through a very successful World Cup qualifying campaign in which the national team won all of their games. Saldanha did this without including a lot of big names in his lineup. Most controversially, he refused to start Brazil's deadliest attackers, Pelé and Tostao, together. The latter, playfully nicknamed the White Pelé, was often excluded. Rivellino was another notable player he left out. However, the player whose exclusion prompted the interference of Medici was the striker Dario. Medici wanted to see Dario in the team and made no secret about it. In response, Saldanha, a fierce, uncompromising journalist and an ideological opponent of the regime, allegedly replied, "I do not mess with his cabinet. He will not mess with my team." Using a string of poor results in friendly matches and internal squad friction as a pretext, the CBF, heavily influenced by military handlers, purged Saldanha. In his place, they installed 38-year-old Mario Zagallo, a tactically astute veteran of the 1958 and 1962 triumphs. Despite the turmoil at home, Brazil delivered some of the most beautiful footballing displays ever seen. Zagallo rejected the defensive, highly rigid tactical trends dominating Europe at the time, most famously exploited by the Italians, the catenaccio. Instead, he engineered an audacious lineup that placed 5 natural number 10s, players who traditionally demanded absolute freedom and the center of attention, into a single, cooperative formation. Pelé, Tostao, Rivellino, Gerson, and Jairzinho. With everything going on back at home, citizens living under brutal, strict social restrictions, the national team operated with an almost miraculous level of mutual trust and creative autonomy on the pitch. It was a celestially coordinated collective where individual egos were sacrificed for the harmony of the group. Tostao played out of his natural position to pull defenders away for Pelé. Jairzinho ran the flanks with infectious joy, scoring in every single match of the tournament, a record that still stands. The final game against Italy at the Aztec Stadium became a clash of 2 entirely different ways of viewing the world. Italy played with cold, calculated efficiency, relying on ironclad man-marking. Brazil played with the joyful rhythm of a street carnival. But July 3rd, 1974 was one of the days when things went dark. The Battle of Dortmund between Brazil and Netherlands in the 1974 World Cup offers an interesting study of 2 footballing superpowers experiencing profound internal crises of identity. Brazil had been battling and resisting, mostly unsuccessfully, state-sponsored shifts by the military government which prioritized strength and a projection of raw power over the free-flowing, beautiful football the Selecao have been known for. And the Netherlands were in an era characterized by a rejection of old norms, leading to a cultural revolution, bits of which ultimately bled onto their football. By the time they met at the 1974 World Cup, the Netherlands were at the peak of their powers, while that of the Brazilians was slowly faltering. Brazil, having won 3 of their previous 4 World Cups for the first time since they won their first World Cup, were without Pelé, the footballing icon retiring from the national team in 1971. Other pillars of the 1970 team, such as Gerson and Tostao, were also gone. The 1974 Selecao mutated into an unrecognizable aggressive unit. Zagallo built a team centered around a rigid defensive block, relying heavily on physical enforcers like Marinho Chagas and Piazza to disrupt opponents through systemic fouling. The creative burden was placed almost entirely on Jairzinho and Rivellino, who found themselves starved of service and isolated in an uninspiring system. The group stages exposed this tactical stagnation. Brazil put forward toothless, uninspiring performances, drawing 0-0 against both Yugoslavia and Scotland, only advancing to the second round on goal difference after a 3-0 win over Zaire. The fluid collective rhythm that had defined the country's sporting identity for nearly 2 decades was completely replaced by anxious, stop-start gameplay. The team were playing purely to survive. When confronted by the fluid excellence of the Dutch, the Brazilians experienced a massive collective shock. They realized that their organic, slower tempo rhythms could no longer compete with the Netherlands' fast-paced, fluid harmonization, bits of which would eventually be exported to other European countries, revolutionizing the game in ways never seen before. Dutch society was a rigid and strict society which ran on pillarization and an idea of unquestionable adherence to hierarchies. Society was characterized by pillarization, where people often remained confined to their separate institutions. Catholic, Protestants, they each had their separate social organizations, which may include political parties, unions, newspapers, banks, hospitals, schools. By the mid-1960s, however, a massive generational shift led by the post-war baby boomers generation dismantled these rigid boundaries, ushering a society where individuals felt empowered to express themselves and alter power dynamics in every aspect of society, including football. Previously, managers acted as uncompromising autocrats, and players were expected to stand passively. Total football flipped the script, creating a dressing room culture where players and coaches collaborated as pairs, openly debating strategies and demanding tactical autonomy. Dutch culture has long been defined by a historic tug-of-war between two opposing values: a strict, rigid work ethic and the pursuit of a unique concept celebrating warm, harmonious communal comfort. The traditional work ethic instilled a deep appreciation for rigorous discipline and order, while the concept of communal comfort celebrated shared experiences and collective harmony. Total football resolved this paradox by combining artistic expression with machine-like system discipline. The creative forward was only allowed a luxury of artistic expression because the rest of the team performed the grueling, disciplined labor of running into defensive spaces to cover the gap. The system operation was heavily trust-based and required extreme physical dedication. Furthermore, the immense value placed on the shared experience meant that the beauty of how the group worked together was prioritized over a cold, ruthless focus on the final score. When they lost the 1974 World Cup final, the nation did not plunge into despair. Instead, they celebrated the team for their performance. Nobody could have pioneered such a style of football, quite like the Dutch, as their environmental and material conditions necessitated this unique invention. Total football is rooted in the unique physical geography of the Netherlands, a country that is incredibly small, flat, and densely populated. Furthermore, much of its land was historically reclaimed from the sea through an intricate engineering process of building dikes, canals, and pumping systems. When tactical thinkers look at a football field, they view it through the exact lens of a spatial architecture. Total football is, at its core, a conceptual game of space management. The goal was to keep the field as small as possible when defending, to suffocate the opponents, and to make it as massive as possible when attacking, to stretch the defense. The Dutch team manipulated the dimensions of the pitch using a synchronized high press and offside trap to compress the playable area and instantly expand it with wide wingers upon winning the ball. For decades, pioneering English managers like Jack Reynolds and Vic Buckingham had been sowing the seeds of fluid passing and technical mastery at AFC Ajax, but the true architect of the system was Rinus Michels. Taking over a struggling Ajax side in 1965, Michels realized that static players were far too easy for modern defenses to mark and control. Subsequently, he built a squad that could run relentlessly for 90 minutes. Michels dismantled the traditional rulebook by viewing the football field not as a collection of fixed positions, but as a space to be actively manipulated. His revolutionary approach worked brilliantly on the pitch because it utterly shattered the cognitive radar of opposition teams who were completely unequipped to handle such radical unpredictability. In this era dominated by rigid man-marking systems, the Dutch weaponized chaos. When Johan Cruyff dropped deeper into his own midfield or defensive line to collect the ball, he threw the opposition into an existential crisis. If the central defender followed him, it left a massive gaping hole in the backline. But if the defender stayed put, Cruyff was granted infinite time and space to dictate the game. Furthermore, by pushing attack-minded fullbacks high up the pitch and encouraging centre-backs to surge forward into midfield, the Dutch consistently established an overwhelming numerical superiority. They created triangles of passing options across every blade of grass, ensuring that whoever held the ball always had multiple short, easy passing outlets. Defensively, they turned the game on its head by inventing high pressing, refusing to retreat into their own half, and instead hunting in packs to suffocate the opponent the very second possession was lost, using offside traps to paralyze the enemy's long ball options. This fluid, aggressive style of football stood almost violent contrast to the prevailing tactical giants of the era, while simultaneously acting as an intellectual evolution of others. Its absolute ideological opposite was the Italian Catenaccio system. Yet, while it waged a tactical war against European pragmatism, total football beautifully complemented the poetic, free-flowing individual artistry of Brazil's legendary 1970 Joga Bonito team. While the Brazilians relied on the organic genius of superstar individuals instinctively swapping positions, the Dutch took that beautiful pass-and-move spirit and gave it a structured, properly engineered framework. They took individual flair and turned it into a collective discipline where every player on the squad was required to master the duties of every position, proving that a team could be radically artistic while remaining fiercely organized. When these two footballing giants met, many expected an exhibition of vibrant football fighting to show which was better. The match instead devolved into an unexpected show of violence. Brazil arrived as the undisputed rulers of the sport after the legendary 1970 victory. Football was the cornerstone of the nation. Football was the most important thing in the nation and its global prestige and self-esteem. When the Dutch began outplaying them on the world stage, it made the world champions look ordinary. This was an existential threat to Brazil's identity, which they faced massive amounts of pressure back at home to protect. Brazilian football culture was built entirely on a slower, hypnotic tempo. Players were used to receiving the ball with time to think, look up, and execute beautiful individual maneuvers. Total football's aggressive high pressing completely destroyed this rhythm. For the first time in their lives, the Brazilian players found themselves swarmed by 3 or 4 orange shirts the exact millisecond they touched the ball. This total deprivation of space created immense psychological panic and frustration, causing the players to lash out physically as a response to feeling trapped. They targeted Cruyff, who was believed to be the ringleader. Not that they were wrong, but it didn't matter. Cruyff was an individual acting within a system. Yes, containing him would decrease the quality, but it wouldn't be enough to stop the machine. Ultimately, the victory of the Netherlands and the total disciplinary collapse of Brazil culminated in Luis Pereira's red card. For Brazil, the Battle of Dortmund inflicted a deep psychological wound, forcing the nation into a decades-long identity crisis where they felt compelled to copy European physical and defensive systems to remain globally relevant. For the rest of the world, the match served as a cold announcement that survival now demanded that artistic brilliance be weaponized with a tenacious collective capacity for survival and structural retaliation. The subsequent conversation the result of this match sparked will shape the destiny of the national team for decades to come. Should Brazil prioritize tactical discipline to compete with Europe, or should it stay true to its improvisational, joyful roots? Joga Bonito, or football de força, the football of strength. In the wake of their 1974 World Cup elimination to the Netherlands, the CBF ditched Joga Bonito with the appointment of Claudio Coutinho. In the same year as the World Cup match against the Netherlands, the military regime appointed retired Navy General Admiral Helio Nunes as president of the CBF. This has been put forth by many as a signal of what the CBF's mindset was during this time. Failure was to be dealt with using a more strict and rigid approach. These are conditions in which improvisational artistry, that is the bedrock of Brazilian football, cannot thrive. The managers dictate how players play, and the CBF dictates who becomes the managers. The appointment of Claudio Coutinho to some was seen as an attempt by the military, whose major mode of propaganda was the prosperity of the national team, to mold it in its image. Coutinho was a former army captain who had studied sports science in Europe and physical education in the United States. He completely sidelined traditional Brazilian flair, introducing rigid, militaristic fitness tests, heavyweight training, and a scientific approach to football tactics. Would liken his squad to a light armored unit streets and furnished the training facilities with military and pro-government slogans. Coutinho famously declared that his 1978 squad, which played an incredibly stiff, defensive and physically brutal style as the quote-unquote moral champions after finishing third without losing a match. To many back at home, this team was an unwatchable betrayal of the country's artistic soul. He was relentlessly attacked by the media and was very unpopular amongst the fans. He was axed in 1980. In 1982, under the guidance of visionary manager Tele Santana, Brazil built a side that became universally loved as the greatest team never to win the World Cup. The early 1980s marked a period of profound social transition in Brazil. The military dictatorship was slowly fracturing. Santana completely rejected the defensive tactics of the past decade. He gave his players an uncompromising mandate: play with ultimate freedom, attack continuously, and trust the joy of the beautiful game. The team captured the public's imagination by abandoning the stifling tactical pragmatism that had disillusioned fans following the Pelé era. While the national team had reached the Final Four in the two previous tournaments, those lackluster performances made the brilliance of the 1970 team seem like a fading dream. Under Santana, however, the Selecao reclaimed their identity. To implement this philosophy, Santana created a combination which seemed crazy on paper, but would eventually turn out to be an immensely powerful one. Santana built his system around the legendary Magic Square, in midfield featuring four extraordinary creative, technically flawless players: Zico, Falcao, Cerezo, and Sócrates. On the pitch, this midfield played with an utmost telepathic understanding, utilizing intricate short passes, blind back heels, and fluid positional rotations that completely overwhelmed their opponents. Among these four men, one stood out as the team's star player. I'm talking about the one named after a Greek philosopher. The 1982 Brazil national team, captained by the chain-smoking, politically radical medical doctor Sócrates, represents football's ultimate romantic tragedy and the final stand of pure, unadulterated Joga Bonito. Managed by Tele Santana, this squad was assembled as a direct defiance rebellion against the industrial, hyper-athletic football de força that had infected Brazil football following their traumatic 1974 defeat by the Dutch. Santana fundamentally rejected the notion that players should be treated like cogs in a mechanical system. Instead, he built a system based on absolute creative freedom, joy, and the shared cultural belief that winning was meaningless if it was not done beautifully. The 1982 Brazilians relied on futsal principles adapted to a massive pitch. They did not systematically engineer space like the Dutch, they felt it organically. However, this intoxicating commitment to art over pragmatism ultimately led to their heartbreaking downfall in the tragedy of Sarria against Italy. The anticipation was high for the Brazil squad as it kicked off their World Cup journey in Spain. They delivered on the promise, immediately securing a thrilling 2-1 victory against the Soviet Union before dominating Scotland 4-1 and New Zealand 4-0. That year, the tournament featured 24 teams divided into 6 groups of 4. The 2 teams from each group advanced to a unique second round consisting of 4 teams of 4 3-team groups. Only the winner of each second round group would earn a spot in the semi-finals. Brazil advanced to the second stage alongside South American rivals Argentina and a struggling Italian squad. Italy had barely scraped through the opening rounds, advancing on the back of 3 consecutive draws against Poland, Cameroon, and Peru. The narrative surrounding Italy's campaign was dominated by the inclusion of forward Paolo Rossi. Rossi had just served a 2-year ban for his role in the 1980 match-fixing scandal, which ended a mere 8 weeks before the tournament began. Despite heavy criticism, manager Endo Bearzot stood by the Juventus striker and selected him for the squad. The Italian team entered their June 29th match against Argentina under a cloud of negativity. However, 90 minutes later, they defied expectations by securing their first victory of the tournament. Shortly after, Brazil dismantled Argentina in a brilliant 3-1 win. This result set the stage for a legendary winner-take-all encounter between 2 completely opposite philosophies of football. You play there. Is there anything you want to say? Santana directed this question to Falcao at the conclusion of a team meeting in Barcelona. Since he possessed more ball knowledge of the mentality of Italy's best players than anyone else in the team, due to him plying his trade there, the Roma midfielder was already feeling anxious about the high-stakes match against Italy at the Sarria Stadium, a ground belonging to Espanyol that had since been torn down. Because he played in Italy, Falcao was familiar with their squad. He worried that his Brazilian teammates were underestimating the threat the Italians posed, having been misled by Italy's sluggish start to the tournament. When his manager called on him, Falcao shared his concerns regarding Italian left-back Antonio Cabrini, noting his technical skill and attacking threat. He also warned that defender Claudio Gentile would most likely man-mark Zico relentlessly, looking to replicate the successful job he had just done on Diego Maradona. As established earlier, the Italian philosophy stood in stark contrast to Brazil's fearless, attack-minded approach. Post-war Italy suffered from extreme economic hardship, rampant inflation, and high unemployment, forcing mass migration from the rural south to the rapidly growing northern industrial hubs. Italy's football culture was deeply shaped by the psychological scars of the years of lead, a decade of domestic terrorism, political assassination, and social chaos that plagued Italy throughout the 1970s. Italian society in 1982 was deeply defensive, cynical, and desperate for order and stability. The dominant cultural response is to safeguard what little you have with fierce, uncompromising tenacity and wait for a single, guaranteed opportunity to advance. Catenaccio took this protective instinct, positioning the libero or sweeper, a permanent safety net behind the defense to guard against unexpected failure. The Italians did not care about looking beautiful to the world, and the star forward Paolo Rossi had not yet found the back of the net in the tournament. Some of the lads were teasing me and saying it must have been quite easy to earn a living in Serie A, Falcao says. Defender Oscar later recalled that certain teammates were already looking ahead, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of Poland, their projected semi-final opponents. Holding a superior goal difference, Brazil only needed a draw to advance. Yet, as Zico remembers, in the dressing room before the game, Pelé never told us to hold back. Our commitment was always to go for the win. That was the true Brazilian way. Many fans in Barcelona were still making their way to their seats when Cabrini delivered a cross to Rossi to head home. Just 5 minutes into the match, Italy held a 1-0 lead and Rossi had finally scored his first goal of the tournament. Brazil responded quickly through Sócrates, but a disastrous defensive error in the 25th minute allowed Rossi to pounce on the loose ball and restore Italy's advantage. When Brazil leveled the score again in the 68th minute, Falcao celebrated so hard, screaming and all, that he nearly choked on his chewing gum. With the score tied at 2-2, Brazil held the aggregate score required to advance. However, with roughly 18 minutes remaining, Italy earned a corner and Rossi capitalized to complete his hat-trick. The referee later incorrectly ruled out a subsequent Italian goal for offside, shortly before ending a match that would eternally be mourned in Brazil as a Sarria tragedy. When Italy won, it shattered the Brazilian cultural belief that joy and rhythm could conquer the world. It forced a deeply spiritual nation to confront the harsh reality that modern football demanded discipline, structure, and a loss of innocence. The fallout of this defeat altered the nation's footballing philosophy, ushering a preference for more pragmatic and physical tactics over the ensuing decades. By the time Brazil defeated Italy on penalties to lift the 1994 World Cup, team style had lost the flamboyancy of their predecessors. By the 1990 World Cup, the pendulum swung violently back to utilitarian realism under Sebastião Lazzaroni. By the 1990s, European football had completely evolved. This period saw the rise of sophisticated European and South American systems. Arrigo Sacchi's high-pressing, zona marking, AC Milan, and the Dutch total football influence and the tactical discipline of German teams. The game shifted from 1v1 duels to 11 versus 11 systems. Space on the pitch became dramatically harder to find as teams squeezed the field. For a team whose style was reliant on superior individual brilliance, it became increasingly harder to get away with some of the things they used to get away with. By prioritizing efficiency over the aesthetic beauty of the past, the Brazilian Football Federation is often perceived as subordinating local Brazilian identity to a Western template of what constitutes a correct and professional team. Critics argue that when Brazil wins, the narrative praises its creative chaos, or when it loses, it is blamed for a lack of discipline, creating a tension between the need to win and the desire to maintain a unique national identity. Lazzaroni committed the ultimate cultural sin by abandoning Brazil's traditional back four defense to implement a 3-5-2 system, a highly defensive system utilizing a sweeper. His heavy focus on tactical discipline, physical conditioning, and structural organization at the expense of the team's artistic flair quickly made him a very unpopular man. From the perspective of the fans, the team played an ugly, uninspiring, and hyper-physical style that resulted in Brazil's worst World Cup finish in 20 years, getting knocked out in the round of 16 by Argentina. This made it 20 years Brazil had gone without a World Cup title. Winning the World Cup is usually one of the best things to happen to football players. Most will tell you that particular day was the best day of their lives, outpouring emotions, tears, joy, ecstasy, euphoria, every positive emotion ever they feel as their hands grip the World Cup trophy in front of the largest audience football can muster. However, the Brazil captain that lifted the 1994 World Cup trophy used that medium to do something rather unconventional. With the trophy in hand, he was captured through the TV screens of millions of people, hurling insults and uttering curse words, sending a rage-filled message to all those who had wronged him. The media that made him the scapegoat, the face of the failure of 1990, making him the poster boy of the team's uninspiring World Cup campaign 4 years earlier. His name became synonymous to everything antithetical to what Brazil stood for. 4 years later, that name was on the team sheet with the captain's inscription beside it, a name that delivered the 4th world title. That name would eventually have the title of the manager of the Brazil national team added to it over a decade later. The name would eventually make so many headlines for actions that drew the ire of Brazil legends such as Pelé and Sócrates. The name, Dunga.